I started in the investment business in 1992, and then in 1994 I started my own investment firm. I left a major Wall Street firm and started my own firm, which at the time was the first full-service investment firm on the internet. Yeah, so I started my career with a Wall Street firm and then went independent and started my own firm back in 1994. Our clients are people all over the world, mainly really high net worth, large institutions or individuals. Some of our clients are in the many multi-billion dollar net worth range. So most of what I spend my time on is big picture economic consulting for big organizations, large charitable organizations or individuals, ultra high net worth individuals or businesses. I help them understand the way that the world is changing and look at big picture economic trends. So I'm a Bitcoin evangelist and active in kind of promoting Bitcoin, and I'm sort of personally obsessed with it. And I also work with the Bitcoin Association, which is an industry group that is focused on advocacy and promotion of Bitcoin with people and governments and charitable organizations. At first, I got interested in Bitcoin just as a speculative kind of venture. But then as I learned more about it, I became more and more serious about it, and I started attending conferences and talking to more people and reading about it, and I became obsessed and really focused on it. And now these days I spend quite a bit of time focused on Bitcoin. So I focus on emerging markets all over the world, such as when I started my career it was India and China. These days it's a lot of the Middle East, Latin America as well. But I travel about half the year, and I'm in places like the Middle East quite a bit, working on these kind of big picture economic issues and trends, working with some of the largest organizations in the world. I do a lot of things with my clients that relate to building bridges and making connections. I do a lot of introductions, a lot of facilitation of large deals and that kind of thing. Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely recommend Bitcoin to my clients because depending on their situation, but generally yes, because I believe in Bitcoin. Our clients are a little bit early for Bitcoin yet. A lot of the really largest investors, it's still early and it's still kind of a small area as of right now. On the deals that I work with, Bitcoin isn't a component yet, but I am certainly known among my clients and colleagues as somebody who talks about this to no end, and I am always trying to get them interested and talk and find a way that would be a fit in the right circumstances for the people that I work with. I think that there hasn't been anything like this that I've seen in my career, which is a really fundamental difference in the way that money works and the way that economics works. Bitcoin is revolutionary because it enables people to do things that they couldn't do before. It enables you to transfer money in a way that you just couldn't do before, and enables you to have control of your own money in a way that just wasn't possible. Bitcoin is speculative and risky, but if it works, it's going to be a really big deal. So for the type of investments that people make with speculative portion of their investments, this is something that makes sense. For my own personal money, I probably put a little bit too much, more than I would recommend for most people. But that's because I believe in it and I'm comfortable with the risks that I'm taking with it. It's partly a personality thing. The difference between people that are interested in Bitcoin and the people that don't really care, it's the personality. I noticed that a lot of people who go to these conventions and conferences and things like that have a really similar personality. So it's partly the type of curious mind who's a little bit maybe geeky and a little bit interested in these kind of weird issues like economic trends and technology and the convergence of them. Yes, I definitely think that once people understand Bitcoin, they tend to be really excited. I know very, very few people who truly understand Bitcoin who aren't excited about it. A lot of people start somewhat interested, but once they go down that rabbit hole of learning more about Bitcoin, they become almost universally really interested in it because they start to see the potential that this has as globally transformative technology. Yeah, I think that the general population is going to become a lot more interested in Bitcoin as there's more educational opportunities out there. It's still really early yet, and there was a time when we had to explain to people what email was and how the internet worked and how phones worked, and mobile phones were a very weird concept at one point. But as more people are learning about this, then it's going to become more mainstream because it is so exciting. One of the interesting things about Bitcoin and why it attracts a lot of people like me who are focused on freedom and human rights is because it gives more power to people. And when people have more power, it creates more of a balance between them and government. And it's less of a coercive and violent type of role that government has and more of a cooperative role. Government, with Bitcoin, since government can't control it, they have to negotiate with people more on a value proposition of what they offer, rather than simply controlling something and forcing people to do something which may or may not be right for them. Since Bitcoin can't be controlled by governments, it makes it so that governments have to deal with people rather than from a place of control. They have to deal with people from a place of voluntary relationship and a voluntary agreement where they're offering something to the people rather than simply dictating something to them. Yeah, these days, definitely government is based on violence and coercion. That's what they are. And even the most well-meaning things done by government, the most well-meaning programs, at the end of the day, are enforced by violence. The way that Bitcoin can be a way around this is that when government doesn't have that ability to control things technically, then they have to basically ask people for voluntary compliance. And it's a lot harder to get people to voluntarily comply with things that they don't agree with, like bombing people in foreign lands or any number of other things, which the governments do, even though the majority of people tend to disagree with them. There's all kinds of things that governments do every day, like bombing people in foreign lands, that the people don't agree with. And the government does it anyway because they have this control relationship where they can make people do things. Bitcoin reduces that control and makes it so that government can't control. And therefore government has to do something that the people voluntarily agree to. That's a lot harder for them. For Bitcoin to work and make a massive impact on how people have power, it doesn't need to be adopted by everyone, doesn't even need to be close to adopted by everyone. Just the amount of adoption that's equivalent to a small third world country currency, or if all of Bitcoin in the world becomes the size of one major tech company, that's a pretty big impact and quite a bit of a difference from where we are today. Yeah, it would be great if we reached a point in this world where governments had to really make a better case for why they're doing these things with people's money. And if people have control of their own money, where it can't be seized by governments in an easy way, then governments have to make a sales case on why to do these things. And that's a lot harder for them to do than just simply taking the money and spending it on things that, in general, people often disagree with. Some people are really concerned about intermediaries, some of the major companies in the space who've received venture capital and some of these other things, because they say, hey, they're controlling your keys, that's against the purpose of Bitcoin. And they have a good point, but what they're forgetting sometimes is how easy the barriers to exit are. These are not the old days where you have to fill out all kinds of forms to switch your account from Merrill Lynch to Morgan Stanley. With Bitcoin, if you're not happy with one of these third-party providers, you can switch instantly, and there's nothing that they can do to stop you. You don't need to sign anything. You can simply transfer your Bitcoin. So I really support a lot of these companies that are providing an on-ramp and making it easier for people to buy Bitcoin and participate. But yeah, ultimately it's great when people have more control and they control their own private keys. These intermediaries who hold Bitcoin for people have some drawbacks. The intermediary could fail, they could be victims of hacking or government seizure or something like that, but they do provide an advantage in that it makes it easier for people to do things that they just wouldn't really realistically do. Most regular people don't understand things like two-factor authentication. Most regular people don't even have the technical skills to set up a Gmail account or a blog. So they're just not going to go and download a complex wallet and print keys offline and do these kind of things. So the intermediaries do serve a very valid kind of thing. Yeah, auto nuts who love cars always criticize people for not changing their own oil. But the fact is, most people don't want to change their own oil. And the intermediaries in the Bitcoin space do the same kind of thing. Yes, it may be, for a tech person, not that hard to set up your own wallets, but the intermediaries make it easier for people to do that, and that's a valuable role. And so I think they're going to continue to grow over the next 5 years. You're going to see more of these kind of groups that make it easier to buy Bitcoin, easier to store Bitcoin, easier to hold Bitcoin. But it won't change the fundamental. I talk to a lot of major players on Wall Street and hedge funds and other groups. I have a lot of friends in this space, and customers and clients and people that I've worked with over the years. In general, right now, it's still pretty early yet. There is some interest, there's some ridicule, there's some diehard interest from some of the well-publicized groups that have backed it, but in general, it's really early yet, and it hasn't picked up as much as it could in the future. Over the last 3 years, I've seen a difference in the way that people on Wall Street and really everywhere else in the professional world have looked at Bitcoin. It was completely laughed at a couple of years ago and not considered realistic at all. And the first conferences that I went to, I would take my jacket off because I just wouldn't fit in, and there was no investors there. And then a few venture capitalists and others, people started showing up to these things, and you've seen this change ever since, where more and more serious, so-called serious people in the investment business are getting interested in this and participating. Over the last 3 years, I've seen an incredible change in the type of people that are interested in Bitcoin, who go to meetups and go to conferences. It used to be pure techie people, and then it just started with a few people from Wall Street. Now it's much more common for people from the so-called mainstream professional industries in Wall Street to be interested in this. Yeah, in the charitable sector, I've seen more interest, and from both using Bitcoin as a tool to help in the mission and also from fundraising. It's still early yet, but I think the foundations and charities out there do understand that this is something that has potential as a tool. I'm not a fan of regulation for Bitcoin. I think that it has a lot of built-in regulations in its own protocol that make it so that you don't need another outside regulator to forcibly make people comply with rules that they invent. The reason that governments are looking at regulating Bitcoin stems from a few different things, either lack of understanding or political opportunism, where people are using Bitcoin to try and create headlines and further their own political ambitions, or it could be regulatory relationships that they have with banks or others who view themselves as competitors of Bitcoin. Or it could be genuine, real concerns for customers. Those are the main four ways that people would, reasons that people would regulate Bitcoin. Yeah, I think some of the regulation desire stems from regulatory capture, and a lot of it is political posturing, media, and political opportunism. Yeah, right now in America we have a system, and really globally, we have a system where large banks are very closely tied with politicians, and they have a pretty good thing going. They've got hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money in the form of bailouts, which have gone to bonuses and other things. So they have a vested interest in keeping that system the way it is, and there are definitely powerful vested interests who don't want to see something like Bitcoin come along, which has a better way of doing a lot of the things that they've done for a long time. Yeah, I think that some of the reason that government is pushing for regulation is pushed by the major banks. I don't know how much of a real conspiracy it is, or how much of it is just simply them playing by the same kind of system and communicating in a way that they want to see things continue the way that they are. Yeah, Bitcoin's emergence as a major currency can definitely have a major upsetting effect on the way that money works as we know it, the way governments work, and the way banks work. Absolutely. I think Bitcoin has the ability to change the way that our entire system works, including toppling the Fed or changing the systems of central banks all over the world. It has that potential. I'm not a fan of the current financial system where the Federal Reserve has the ability to devalue people's money by simply printing new money. It's not fair to the people who already hold cash, and it's a bad system for that and many other reasons. Yeah, I think that people see Bitcoin as a tool of freedom and a way for you to control your own destiny, control your own financial system in a way that you haven't been able to do before. The reason that a lot of people are excited about Bitcoin these days, it's partly ideological, where people who are interested in freedom and free will are interested in this technology, but really it's driven by what the technology can do. And the two are hand in hand. Some people try and separate politics from Bitcoin, but when you talk about things like having the ability to remove yourself from the control that government has over with central banks and other things, then Bitcoin has a lot of power for doing that. So the two are very closely related. So Bitcoin absolutely can be used for crime, it can be used by criminals, it can be used by terrorists for all kinds of evil things. But so can shoes. So can shoes, so can phones, so can roads. Without shoes, it would be very hard for somebody to mug you. Well, unfortunately, I think that the governments have so much power and they're so entrenched that I think that they will have a heavy influence on how things are done with companies involved in the Bitcoin space. The good news is that in some ways it is a bit of a Trojan horse, because this system, once people have Bitcoin, it doesn't matter how regulated the third party is that they buy it, they still have the ability to move that and control that in a way that they have not ever had before. I think it's unfortunately inevitable that we're going to see more and more government controls over Bitcoin, but the good news is that the core fundamentals of Bitcoin still allow people to move from those third parties, no matter how regulated they are, and have their control of their own private keys and their own Bitcoin. Governments are all over the place on where they are with regulating Bitcoin. Some are much more friendly than others, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. We may see some governments who outright try and ban the entire technology itself, and that'll be very difficult. As this increases in adoption, it'll become less and less practical, just like those governments who tried to have wholesale bans of the internet. Yeah, governments, we tend to be in fear of governments because they have so much power over our daily lives. It's impossible to do almost anything without some kind of government regulation governing us. But at the end of the day, people really do have a lot of power. People can topple entire governments and change systems. And as adoption increases, there's been many things where people have just, throughout human history, have just looked at governments and said, nah, we're not going to do that. And that's a really powerful thing that has caused great change. Everybody from Rosa Parks to all kinds of great leaders that we respect in history have just looked at governments and said, nah. And that's, I think, what we're going to see a lot with Bitcoin around the world. Yeah, if you look at the history of government and you look at what it is to be, say, a criminal, we're taught to say that criminals are bad, but through many times in human history, criminals have been the heroes. There's been laws against aiding runaway slaves or any number of other things where the government has been the one who's limiting rights. And usually rights and great freedoms and innovations in freedom come from people like Martin Luther King and others who stand against government and are often named criminals themselves and imprisoned or whatever. But those great innovations in freedom come from the private sector, and they come from individual people, not from governments.
In the fall of 2008, the world financial system nearly fell apart because of the incompetence and instability of the banking system.
With Bitcoin, anyone can send and receive any amount of money anywhere in the world, basically for free. And there's nothing that the big banks or politicians can do to stop it.
At the Money 2020 conference, there was a Bitcoin panel where 4 Bitcoiners were speaking, and behind me were executives and chairmen of a board of several different credit unions. And one turned to the other and said, "These guys don't know the true meaning of evil till we fuck them."
You see, I just want your cash.